to our Maundy Thursday worship service. Our gospel lesson for this evening is from St. John, the 13th chapter, verses 1 to 17. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And during supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray Jesus, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from supper, laid aside his garments, and girded himself with a towel. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with a towel with which he was girded. He came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, "What I am doing you do not know now, but afterward you will understand." Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you have no part in me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." And Jesus said to him, "He who has bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but he is clean all over. And you are clean, but not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him, and that is why he said, "You are not all clean." When he had washed their feet and taken his garments and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, so you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should also do as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them." This is the gospel of our Lord. A popular form of education in the lower elementary grades for many years has been the procedure called show and tell. It's also invaded some pulpits as well, and preachers do object-centered sermons. They hold up or employ some particular item easily seen and understood by the congregation in order to gain their attention and hopefully make a point that will be remembered. It was something of that nature that Jesus was doing on the night of the Last Supper. As it is recorded for us in the book of John, in some ways it comes as a surprise to us, just as much as it did to those early disciples. We may even find ourselves as scandalized by it as Peter, because we are, of course, expecting that what we get in the other Gospels is the tradition of Jesus taking bread and wine and sharing them with others in remembrance of him. But in John's Gospel, he doesn't tell us about that event at all. Rather, he tells us about something that happened at the meal, not reported by the other three evangelists. He tells us this remarkable story of Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. So why did Jesus do it? Well, I suppose he wanted to show and tell them something about himself, and something about themselves. First, something about himself. It's not clear precisely when this event occurred in relationship to the passing of the bread and the wine, because John says he did it during supper. We don't know exactly when. But in any event, the foot washing is another way for Jesus to show the disciples what it meant to give his body and his blood. It was an act of service, which no one else could or would do. Jesus and the disciples had walked a long way from Bethany, and their sandals on their feet were dirty and dusty, and so were their feet. And the basin and the towel were there to be used by the servant who was appointed for the purpose of washing their feet as they came in. But there was no servant. And it was evident that if the feet were to be washed, then one of them was going to have to do it. But that was a lot to expect from a bunch of guys who only a few days previously, if you remember, had been quarreling about who would have the best seats in the kingdom of heaven, the chief seats, if you will, in the kingdom. And in their pride, they preferred, after all, including their master, they thought they should just all eat unwashed, rather than any one of them offering to do the job. In their pride, they failed not only to minister to one another, but they failed to minister to Jesus himself. I wonder if Jesus was sorrowfully just exasperated with them. You know, the way the parents get with children when they stubbornly insist on their way over and over and over again, and even to the fact that the children might get hurt by what they want, but after a while the parents just get tired of it. We stop and think Jesus had talked and talked and talked for 3 years, and now he's sitting there going, did I do all that for nothing? What more could he say? How could he express the message of the love of God any more vividly than he already had? What good would more words do if they still did not understand or apply what he had been saying? And so Jesus must have decided that an object lesson was in order. He would act out his teaching. He would show them who he was and what his teaching was all about. He who had come from God and was about to return to God would wash their feet. We know that through the other Gospels, we're told that in the breaking of the bread, Jesus said, "This is my body given for you." But now he quite literally uses his body to show the attitude of humility and service that was part of his mission as the Son of God. As God laid aside the divine glory at the incarnation, so Jesus lays aside his garments tonight to do the work of a slave. And he was showing and telling them something about himself. That humility is one of the characteristics of God. Funny, we never think about God as being humble. Maybe because humility is another one of those words that has some bad press in our time. Humility doesn't really mean eating dirt. It means that you have enough confidence in who you are that you can recognize yourself even when you are dirty. It means that you can take the risk the dirt, because your appearance does not have to be defined by the outward cosmetics, your pride. God is like that. The God who loved and lived among us in Jesus Christ is like that. While the disciples may still have been thinking about who was going to get the chief seats in the kingdom, The God who made them was washing their feet. Jesus also sought to show and tell us something about ourselves as well. He tells us when we participate in his body and blood, then we also become the foot washers of the world. The servant is not greater than the master. And then he says, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another." When we present-day disciples of Jesus Christ come to eat at his table, it is appropriate to examine ourselves as to whether we are thinking about who's going to get that chief seat, or are we thinking about the opportunities for service. The Holy Meal itself should be a reminder of our call to serve the needs of the world. In the early church, people did not show up at worship and find the communion elements all prepared in advance and waiting for them. No one had cut the bread ahead of time or poured the wine or grape juice into those little cups. They brought their bread and wine with them, and they presented it at the time of the offering. And theirs was a largely trading commerce where people dealt in kind. And so the priest would take enough of the bread and wine to be used for communion, and then the rest of it would also be taken, and it was distributed to the poor in the community after worship. Participating in the communion of the body and blood of Christ automatically meant being involved in ministering with Christ to the needs of the world. As Christ gave his body and blood for the world, we are called to give of ourselves as well. As he washed the feet of the disciples, so we are called to outdo one another in serving and showing honor to one another. Jesus has given us, has shown us, an example of what we are to be if we are to follow him in the world, if we are to presume to partake of his body and blood in his holy supper. Jesus said, "Do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you." I hope you will think of the Lord's Supper as a high honor and a precious privilege to share with the saints of all ages around the banquet table of our Lamb. But please remember, those saints deserve the name of saint because they went with their Lord all the way. And how could they do anything else after they had tasted and saw that the Lord was good? They were set free to be humble. Their spirits could soar into service. Although the doors of our building are officially closed right now, we continue to serve our Lord. Some of you are calling members and friends and checking in on them. 3 of you came out on this rainy, windy day today to give help to over 60 families in need of food, following the ever-changing guidelines of our CDC and ways that we have to do things differently now. Some of you even sewed masks to help keep us and others safer in our relationship and dealing with other people. Thank you to all who are continuing to do your part to love one another during this special time. final story. A preacher once took his congregation on an imaginary tour through a museum in New Jerusalem. He told about what he saw there. He saw the widow's mite, and then he saw the feather of a little bird, one of the sparrows that God had such great care and love for. And then he saw some swaddling clothes, and a hammer, and 3 nails, and a few thorns, and a sponge that had once been dipped into vinegar, and a small piece of silver representing 30 more, and a common drinking cup that had a very honorable place. And then the person asked the attendant who was watching over the museum, "Have you got a towel and a basin in your collection?" Can you guess the answer? The person said, "No, those are not here. You see, they are in constant use." The question for us on this Holy Week, on this Maundy, Thursday, is, are your towel and your basin in use? In other words, are you serving your Lord in all the ways that you possibly can? Do you have love for one another? Amen.